Nature versus nurture. What is more important for human development? Guess what? They're literally one and the same. Like, one of the silliest things I have ever heard thus far, one of the most ridiculous concepts is the argument between, especially in the philosophical and psychological fields, what is more influential in human development? Nature versus nurture. Because I'm sorry, but like, nature literally is nurture, but just evolutionary and generational. That's all it is. So at the end of the day, everything is nurture. Because what is nurture? It is your conditioning. And so in this video, I'm just going to break down and give you a very, very simple explanation of how to use your conditioning, your nurture, and therefore your nature to actually become more effective and productive in your life and just achieve more. Just simple as that. So she is back again, my darling humanoids, androids, reptiloids, asteroids, or whatever way you like to identify yourself, with even more stuff in continuation of a theme that I have raised in my previous video where I mentioned how you can liken your life and the way that you remain productive and effective to the way that you play video games. And yeah, this video is just going to kind of carry on that concept to break it down more of like how it actually works and how it goes beyond just the philosophy of life being a game and everything like that, and how you can actually not even psychoanalyze yourself, just like literally review your life, review your ancestry and the conditioning that you have all undergone, to then, instead of fighting your nature, which once again is actually just your nurture and conditioning over many, many generations, and instead of fighting it, once again, just leverage it to amplify and get more out of your life. Find a way to fit into the society, find a way to actually do what you're most likely to enjoy and do it effectively. So, first of all, even when people talk about their biology being their nature, how some people they give the excuse that, oh yeah, I could do so much, but it's just in my nature to blah 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 blah, and then excuses roll in. Thing is, your nature, once again, which is your biological predisposition, your animal self, is literally just the way that your body as a human being has evolved over centuries, over hundreds of years, over thousands of years, over millennia of conditioning of external circumstance. Like that is literally how evolution works. Is that there is a biological creature over time that has to adapt to external stimuli, to external circumstances, to external conditions. Therefore, you get conditioned. So, in essence, to amplify your function as a human being is to understand what that conditioning has been, how it's evolved. So, kind of diving as deep as the original evolution of not just the human species, but biological creatures such as mammals in general. You can go as deep as that. At a surface level, really, it's about understanding how the way that your ancestry, so as a human, has been conditioned to function within the societies that it has existed in. But obviously, you don't want to start going too deep right away. You want to start understanding your conditioning at a surface level initially. And what is your surface level? It is your physical life, your physical existence as you are right now in this particular lifetime. So you as you're defined by society with your particular name, your particular disposition, your particular time frame of your life. So the easiest way to get into understanding your conditioning is to start with the basic things such as sports, and how the things like sports and other activities that you were assigned, or the groups that you were put into as a child, have formed you and shaped you and conditioned you to function in a certain way within society, which then impacts, for example, the way that you work in a workplace or in an office or in a studio, or in general, how you engage with other people within corporate structures. So let me give you some analogies so that you catch on to the general principle. Let's say that as a child, you were mostly put into competitive sports where you were pinned against other kids to compete for the title for who runs the fastest, who jumps the highest, and so on and so forth. Or this even applies not just to sports, but in general, the typical educational school system is pinning kids against each other to compete for who gets the highest marks, who gets the highest grade, who scores the most, who completes the most tasks, so on and so forth. But especially in terms of sports, what that conditions a child into is the ability to really not even overextend themselves, but just have a short and impulsive work streak. So, a short period where an individual just really, really hyper focuses and dives really, really deep into what they're doing, such as sprinting or jumping or studying, like trying to grind before you pass an exam, trying to learn the whole textbook right before, like an hour before you have your exam, just to then kind of pump it out within the 1 or 2 or 3 hours that the exam lasts, and then forget all of it, right? And this kind of conditioning is then leveraged by, the easiest example being IT companies hiring developers who are then put into teams that work in sprints, where the sprints are essentially short periods of time where developers sit down, do an intense, super duper focused amount of really, really intense development work on a certain IT product before releasing it to then be tested. And when the testing phase happens, the developers get to take a little break, get a little breather before they have to go back and reiterate and work on the product once again. And this doesn't just apply to developers and IT companies, but really applies to a lot of project-based work, where then the work of the individual is judged on, for example, measuring their KPIs and the amount of KPIs that they have met, measuring the lines of code that they have written, and so on and so forth. So essentially, that kind of conditioning is perfect for then creating employees and workers that are measured by certain quantifiable outputs. On the other hand, let's say that as a child you were put into very team and community based sports such as basketball or volleyball. And let's say that as a kid, for example, maybe you participated in a lot of group projects, maybe you participated in a lot of group activities, creating the school newspaper, things like that. Essentially, any activity where the individual doesn't just rely on themselves and their own abilities, but also heavily relies on the accomplishments of their teammates and the well being of the whole team. So, people with that particular conditioning are exactly the people that do really well in the kind of standard office work, where collaboration and the sense of having a family, the workplace being a family, and all of those really fun corporate concepts apply, because that kind of conditioning obviously implies higher emotional intelligence, higher sensitivity to social cues, and in general, better interpersonal interactions and empathy and understanding towards other people. And I'm really hoping that at this point it's kind of becoming obvious what I'm trying to get to. So, for example, chess and tennis players make amazing negotiators in the future. Then anyone with a dance or drama background make great presenters, and so on and so forth. So, to properly leverage this practice of kind of self decoding, essentially what you need to do is look back at, once again, absolutely anything you did as a child, any activities that your parents have signed up to, the way that your school used to operate, because obviously not all schools are the same. Different schools encourage different ways for children to engage with each other. Some schools, they encourage more collaboration practices. Some schools, they encourage more competitive practices, and that heavily is based on not just your nationality and country of origin, but also just the particular school that you went to and the school culture. And then analyze which ones of those conditions you actually did quite well in and which ones you found more challenging. And then, pretty obviously, anything that you actually did really well in as a child and you always got rewarded for is your superpower pretty much in your adult life. It is what then becomes your nature, your standard modus operandi, as you could call it. It is just the way that you naturally tend to function as a human being through, once again, being conditioned as a child. And then on the other hand, any kind of work that you found challenging, that you were punished for as a child, essentially becomes your task to incorporate consciously as an adult in your further life in order to become whole as a human being. So you don't have to do it. You can just rely on what comes naturally to you and try to live your life on easy mode. But the thing is, life will always throw challenges at you. So if you want to become your best self, your highest self, whatever way you like to call it, the most effective and efficient worker, whatever your metrics of achievement are, once again, I return to the exact same point that I say in every single video. You want to become complete as a human being. You want to become well rounded. And what is the way to do that? It is to integrate anything that does not naturally come to you, anything that is your shadow, anything that you have not so far incorporated as your second nature. So, once again, what we do is we look at what we have been conditioned to naturally excel at and be good at, and try to improve consciously on the things that we have not managed to do that in. So once again, if, for example, as a child, you were always good in group projects and were not so good at doing something on your own and purely relying on yourself, then in your adult life, most likely you would do well in a job where, once again, you work on a team, you work with other people and can rely on other people. But it would be good for you to also try to do some projects, maybe on the side, maybe have a hobby, maybe just in general try to do some personal development through attending seminars and workshops on how to individualize and separate yourself from the group and try to create something unique and something of your own. And then if on the other hand, you excelled at doing really, really well when working by yourself as a child, when being pinned against other kids and other people. Let's say you were always like a tennis player and a chess player and things like that, and you don't tend to cooperate very well with others, then once again, would be good probably for you to get a job to actually sustain yourself and meet your survival needs through doing some individual projects, individual work, like maybe freelance project development, or maybe some artistic work where you just kind of work by yourself and do your own thing, but then still try to become whole as a human being through actually learning the skills of empathy, emotional intelligence, and how to cooperate with others through, once again, attending seminars, workshops, and really just making it a conscious practice to try to understand other people and develop those interpersonal relationships that you might be naturally lacking. And then, if as a child you were conditioned to, for example, do really, really well in the thinking part and being really, really rational and analytical, so for example, you excelled at things like maths, then once again, as an adult, easiest way for you to sustain yourself and meet your survival needs is to get a job that involves analytics, but to become a fulfilled and whole human being and achieve peak levels of performance, you want to develop your creative capacities and your creative abilities, and vice versa. So, once again, do you see what I'm getting at? We're essentially trying to take this duality, this split that we get conditioned into in our lifetime, and complete ourselves by compensating that split with the opposite to bring ourselves into one complete whole self. But so that is, as I mentioned, just the surface level. That is just your conscious, aware lifetime as you are as an individual in this life, right? What happens when you start going back to your ancestry and trying to decode deeper levels of conditioning, such as, for example, your parents' conditioning, your grandparents' conditioning, and then going to your whole country's, nationalities' conditioning, and then species conditioning, and so on and so forth. This is where things become more complicated because what you have to start considering is the fact that, first of all, there are things such as generational trauma, where if any generation of your ancestry has undergone some extreme stressful conditions, chances are the children of that generation will do anything to oppose whatever the reactionary response to that trauma was. whatever would be the compensation for that trauma. And trying to decode yourself on those deeper levels essentially becomes this really, really complicated process of trying to understand the interplay of how every generation compensates for whatever the previous generation has been lacking. And the funny thing is, why does that happen? Is because until essentially our generation, so like the 21st century, previous generations of humans didn't have the time to even bother with trying to do all of this psychological completion processes and things like that, aside from maybe some very unique individuals who were like the philosophers and the psychologists of like the 20th century, the 19th century, so on and so forth, which was like very, very, very unique individuals, like one in a billion, one in a million. But that is kind of the whole point of us evolving as a species, is that our life quality as a whole improves with every generation. So now it's amazing that we have this opportunity to essentially make sure that we in this lifetime, the generation that we are able to try to become as whole as possible, so that then whoever comes after us, our children, our grandchildren, don't have to do all of this compensation work. Because what is actually the importance of this compensation work, is to start with, right? Is because, once again, as I discussed in every single video, anything that you're not aware of, that you don't consciously participate in, can lead to self sabotage, can become your weakness. And so, if you want to be as overpowered as humanly possible, you want to make sure that you have all of the ground covered, that there is no shadows, there's nothing that you're missing. Which, yeah, sounds like an impossible task, but that is kind of the whole point. That is kind of the whole point of the self development work, that it is a lifelong journey of trying to become whole and find this wholeness, which at the same time is kind of inherent in you anyway. And so, to be honest, you don't actually need to strive for it. And instead, you can just settle for finding inner peace and finding that inner completion within yourself. But that gets into a whole other field of discussion where it's like, then what is the point of life and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just not going to spiral into that right now. But so if we take this whole thing home, right, for this video, if you want to optimize your lifestyle, become the most effective self that you can be in this conscious participatory life, what you want to do is decode your conditioning, starting with your childhood. So, yeah, I hope that this video helps you to embark on this journey. I hope that this made sense. And I hope that this helps you become more aware of your conditioning and how your conditioning prompts you to respond to life circumstances in certain ways. And may you become whole. So, yeah, have a lovely day and good luck embarking on this completion journey.